Welcome to Great in the Sack When Misogyny Leads to Mayhem. I'm your host, Nicole Davenport. They call it a security blanket. You know, after a baby grows old enough to grab a hold of things and hold them close to their tiny, delicate little bodies for comfort and to make the baby feel safe, of course. These things can include an actual blanket, a stuffed animal to cuddle with, or even a cherished toy. Something that would make that tiny little being feel a sense of security. For Nina Aouilk, that item of security was a tray. What kind of tray? Well, exactly the kind of tray you're thinking of to serve food on. From the age of 6 years old, Nina would patiently wait inside of her cold, gray painted room, which contained only a mattress, no blankets, no pillows, not even one toy can be found in this small space that was Nina's. Lots of books, though. Nina basically lives with her ear plastered to the natural, unfinished wooden door, listening and listening. Ow! She says to herself as she presses her raw ear harder against the door. Are they calling for me? Did I hear my name? The name she's waiting for isn't her real name at all. It isn't even a term of endearment. It's more like an ugly nickname, a derogatory term, or even a slur. The name she's so desperate to hear is Pultani. But what does Pultani mean? Well, it can mean a few things, mainly witch, ghost, or evil spirit. So here's this child, so desperate to hear her cue, so she can come out and cook for her family. From the age of 6 years old, which is basically how far back she can remember, this was the only way she could spend time with her family, only when she served them. Modern day slave comes to mind. And this particular evening, at the age of just 14 years old, something feels different, off. You see, Nina's mom has come to wake her so she can serve her father and his 8 friends. This usually happens on Friday and Saturday nights after a long night of drinking. Nina's father is a successful business owner, and some of the businesses that he owned were bars, so it was a given that his house would be the place to go after drinking. Nina just recently hit puberty, period cramps, painful breasts, and all. And even though no one has ever told her about puberty, she manages it alone, like everything else. A huge sign of neglect is hyper independence. Just a little FYI. And remember, I'm not a doctor, I just like to play one occasionally on my podcast. The thing about puberty is that the gut instinct starts to show itself. And Nina's gut instinct is telling her to run. Every fiber in her body is telling her, run fast and run now. Though she doesn't really understand why, except for the increasingly uncomfortable feeling to be around her drunk father and company. She looks over at her tray. She loves that tray. It was the only thing that was hers, the only real symbol of her childhood. That tray was what Nina looked to for comfort and safety. Sure, she has the family dog who is her best friend, of course. But the tray is her security blanket. She lays her head on it, feeling a mixture of worry and hormones as she stares into the scratched up white oval tray with the silver handles on each side. She sees her distorted reflection in it, looking back, panicked. As she lies there on the bare mattress, using her best friend for heat as well as a sympathetic ear, she says, I don't want to go down there. But either way, she gets to her feet, stretches, and lets out a huge, tired yawn. But I have to, she says in a smaller voice. And with that, she heads down their grand staircase to the guest room, tray in hand, ready to serve her father. She has no way of knowing what was about to happen, that this very night would unlock a new, more hellish portion of her life, in which the only goal would be to survive. All of the sources and links can be found on Podbean and on Spotify. This podcast supports endhonorkillings.org. Their mission is threefold: to empower, educate, and eliminate. They aim to speak globally on key issues, shedding light on victims' perspectives and fostering understanding. By breaking the silence, they offer support to victims, ensuring they never feel alone on their journey to freedom. Extreme content warning. This episode contains graphic descriptions of child sexual assault, which I will refer to as CSA, other crimes against children, forced marriage, trafficking, domestic violence, and honor killings, in which I will use the term murder, because the term honor killing implies that there's some sort of honor in this act, which tries to justify it. So it's important that we call it out for what it is, and it is murder. So, that being said, let's get in the sack. Punjab is a region in South Asia, which actually resides over two countries, India and Pakistan. Today, we will be speaking about the Indian Punjab, a place which holds the Golden Temple, a temple which is literally layered with gold. There are also really abstract buildings that easily remind a person of an M.C. Escher print. Punjab's history is consistent with a place of migration and the settlement of different types of people who held all different kinds of cultural belief systems and ideas. The largest belief system in the Punjab region in recent history is Sikhism, which was founded by Guru Nanak. During the end of the 15th century, Sikhism became this popular, progressive religion, or some might call it a philosophy, that advocated for gender equality, social justice, and rejection of caste discrimination. Even though Nanak himself was of the wealthy and prosperous Khatri caste, which were known first for warrior roles, then over time transitioned into traders, administrators, and scribes. From a young age, Nanak was known for his curiosity. He loved to ask questions about everything, which annoyed some, confused others, and caught the admiration of the rest. He would ask, "But why can only certain people come here to worship?" "Nanik," his mother Tripta would say to him, "that's just how it is. But everyone should be able to come together to worship." "Well, Nanik, maybe someday you can spread those ideas throughout the world," she would tell him. One of the cornerstones of Sikhism is Langar, which was established by Guru Nanak because growing up, he wanted so much to eat with everybody of any and all backgrounds, but that was not allowed. Nanak's dad, Metu Kalu, was an accountant, and he was clear that Nanak should follow in his footsteps, even though Nanak showed zero interest in worldly pursuits like wealth or power. He was more drawn to spiritual exploration. He wanted to, for lack of better terms, find himself, which was probably like nightmare fuel to his father. One time, Mehta gave Nanak money to invest in trade, but instead of buying the goods for the trade like a good boy, He used the money to feed the poor and the starving saints that he saw in the streets. He said, "Dad, what I used that money on was a true investment." After realizing Nanak was destined for greater things, not the quote, conventional path, Mehta and Tripta fully supported their son. Guru Nanak was super empathetic, which shaped his inclusive philosophy. He saw a divinity in all beings, regardless of caste, religion, or gender, and he sought to eliminate the divisions that separated everyone. Now, in my 30s, I had zero of my shit together. What about you guys? But Nanak here had a spiritual experience so profound in his 30s, in which he completely disappeared for like 3 days. And when he returned, his mission in life was understood. He told everyone that there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim. Now, these weren't like fighting words or something like that. His words tried to portray the oneness of humanity and God. The gentle but fearless Nanak was unyielding when confronting injustice, speaking out loudly against hypocrisy, inequality, and tyranny, even right in the faces of powerful rulers and religious leaders. He remained humble and worked amongst the people to try to emphasize the dignity of honest work. A mediator, a peacemaker, artist, and poet, Nanak would tell warring groups of the importance of dialogue. It's like he coined the phrase, the pen is mightier than the sword. Not only that, the Guru composed accessible hymns that became the foundation for the Sikh holy scripture, the Guru Granth Sahib, which would also become the name of the 10th Guru, who became the eternal Guru. This sounds great. I mean, right? You got Guru Nanak and the 9 gurus that followed after him, who laid this sturdy foundation of Sikhism as a radically egalitarian faith, which just means that they emphasized the spiritual and social equality of men and women, even going so far as praising women as the source of life and strength. Thanks, Guru. So, what happened to the culture in Punjab? How did it fall into the violent grasp of such a blindly patriarchal society? I felt it was important to explain Sikhism because it is one of the largest philosophical religious belief systems in India, and it is not to blame for what happens in this story. It is actually often culture who is the culprit, and the people within it who hijack religion as a means to justify what it truly seeks, the consolidation of patriarchal power underneath the clever guise of faith. However, some religions are so based on patriarchal beliefs that it becomes difficult to separate the two. But if you think about it, most scriptures promote love and understanding. The people interpreting those scriptures, though, have an agenda, and it's often predatory. So over time, cultural practices and external influences, such as British colonialism and existing patriarchal norms from neighboring Hindu and Muslim societies, eroded these progressive ideals into almost nothing but grains of sand. The rise of cold, rigid social structures and an obsession with the prioritization of honor over individuality is what led to the practices of trafficking, forced marriage, and honor killings, aka murder, and a resurgence of the patriarchal family unit. Inside these families, sons are celebrated as future providers, carriers of the family name, while daughters are seen as liabilities, responsible for walking the impossible tightrope of family honor. sold to men basically as property for a dowry to marry. So much for that equality. The birth of a boy brings celebrations and are colorful and fun and joyous occasions with music and dancing. Meanwhile, the birth of a girl is usually met with silence, disappointment, even ill feelings, and you may even hear a, oh, better luck next time. In rural areas, the horrifying practice of infanticide is common, where baby girls are placed in plastic bags and suffocated. And if a woman has given birth to a baby girl more than once in a row, she is at an automatic increased risk for violence. For example, of becoming what's called a burning bride. Bride burning is a torturous, horrific practice of murder through immolation. The culture will actually blame the woman for birthing too many girls, as though to say that she is cursed, even though we know it is the semen that decides the sex. So it is so ignorant and so infuriating. It's maddening, right? So, to sum it all up, boys carry the family name. They are encouraged to pursue higher education and are basically living gods, while girls are treated like objects, burdens, and their worth is tied to the dowry that they will take with them to the next household, moved, bought, and sold like cattle. I don't know about you, but to me, it sounds like men in this culture are super emotional about having to pay someone to basically take their daughter. Well, you all made it that way. If you hate it that much, do something about it. But of course, that's not what happens, or else you wouldn't be listening to this podcast. Are you familiar with the story of Rapunzel? You know the story by the Brothers Grimm, who are devout Christians, by the way, and literal tools of the patriarchy. Huge fans, in fact, shaping horridly strict and rigid gender roles within their stories as sort of a guideline for how a woman should behave since 1812. Don't even get me started on gender roles within fairy tales and the patriarchy's constant looming presence in them. For example, the tried and true Maiden Locked in the Tower series are a type of metaphor for the protection of a woman's virtue, where they are trapped for their supposed own good, usually by their supposedly caring family or caregivers to protect them from any type of premarital sexual relations, amongst many other things, no doubt. Just like Rapunzel, Nina was trapped, both literally and figuratively, trapped by social expectations, trapped by cultural constraints, and trapped literally by familial control through the very same honor based culture and patriarchal system that Guru Nanak fought against in Punjab centuries ago. But Nina's family didn't live in Punjab. They had long ago moved from India to the UK, 2 hours from London, in fact, and they brought all of their baggage with them, of course, which was crammed tight, nearly bursting with all of their possessions, including their cultural beliefs, that they also decided just had to come with them. This patriarchy adjacent culture belief system could have been put to rest after Nina's family moved to the UK. But that way of thinking is so deeply entrenched into someone's being, the utter denial that one is even deserving of humane treatment. The women are just objects to be used for various things and discarded need be. In the minds of many parents from the Punjab culture, baby girls will just be given to another household. They don't stay, so why should we love them? They're only going to cost us a dowry in the end. Unlike the fairy tale, Nina's tower was built brick by misogynistic brick, made taller and taller by the absolute power of their toxic community and its cultural norms. For Nina, there would be no prince to rescue her. Nina was a great student, eager to be in school, because in school she could be someone different. Well, kind of. Her brother and her were bullied constantly, even assaulted. Many times they were found at the bottom of a pileup after somebody began shouting, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" Nina's father decided that they should live in a predominantly white neighborhood. But that doesn't mean that they were accepted by the white people in the area or at the school, including teachers. It certainly didn't help that Nina's parents wouldn't let her bathe when she needed to or wash her clothes. They wouldn't even allow her that dignity, that basic human need. Still, she found that she was able to immerse herself into stories such as Rapunzel, a consolation to the hell she lived in at home. A lesser hell. None of her teachers would ever say anything about the condition she would come to school in, and even though it was obvious that something was terribly wrong, no one did anything. At home, she was a domestic servant, a modern day slave, never allowed to spend time with the family, always confined to her room unless she was cleaning, making the food, or serving them. But at the age of 14, her role would change. An added trigger warning here because this next part is brutal. As Nina went down those stairs, tray in hand, to serve her father and his 8 friends in that guest room of her family's home, she lowered her head. She entered the room, and her father touched her for the first time in her entire life. He had never so much as held her hand, hugged her, or done anything even remotely close to fatherly toward her. However, this would not be considered fatherly behavior. In fact, the polar opposite, psychopathic behavior. Her father grabbed her by the wrist, causing the tray to fall to the ground, making a huge crunch sound. Using his strength from training as a wrestler as he used to, he aggressively threw her onto the nearby coffee table in the dimly lit guest room and became the first of the 9 men in total to SA her. A 14-year-old girl, his daughter. The first time her father held her hand was as he was holding her down against the table to prevent her from moving or getting away. He used his other hand to put over her mouth. Nina squeezed her eyes wide shut, is how she'll refer to it later, trying to trap any hope left in her body from escaping. Then she was horrifically passed around the room as a completely deprived idea of a party favor, not seen as a human being, but only as an object. She was thrown around the room with such force and violence that she briefly lost consciousness twice. Dishes, glasses, and bottles were falling off the table, shattering everywhere. It was complete chaos. It almost seemed as though her mere presence was evoking and stirring up their extreme hatred of women. This animalistic group behavior is usually common amongst hate crimes, but this is kind of a hate crime. Maybe not first and foremost, but still. Nina was spat on, bitten, punched, stomped on, and kicked, all while her brothers and mom slept upstairs in their home. completely unaware or completely indifferent to what was going on in the guest room downstairs. Nina was punished, gang SA'd, and tortured because she was a girl. Her body quickly became covered in bruises and cuts and blood. After the time After some time had passed, some of the men had gone home, but the most violent and vile of the bunch stayed around to continue this awful attack. When Nina woke the next morning, stuck to the floor by her own blood, she opened her eyes and tried to focus. She realized she was looking at the wall, but what was that on the wall? Oh, oh no. Oh my God. What was that, food on the wall? She was going to be in so much trouble. She began looking around frantically and seeing all of the broken dishes and glasses and bottles. She began to feel sheer panic. After her mother saw she was naked from the waist down, she advised her to go and wash up. Go and shower, she said. She was never allowed to have showers, but she found that the shower was even more painful. She wanted the bucket and the washcloth that she usually got, but she was afraid to ask for it at that point. She didn't know what to do with herself. When she was finished, she was handed a bucket and told to go clean the guest room. After some months, and after she had turned the age of 15, she noticed that her period had stopped coming. Now, this was around 1985, so there wasn't so much being taught in schools about reproductive organs. I mean, nothing in detail anyway. But Nina knew enough to know something was wrong. So she told her mother, "Oh, that's because you're pregnant. You're disgusting. You're pregnant because you asked for it. You are horrible and dirty," her mother told Nina. And Nina believed it, because what other choice did she have? She was taken to a secluded doctor's office not too far from where they lived, on the countryside, away from the prying eyes of their own community. That's where they performed the abortion, and also the first time in her life that Nina would ever receive anything, a simple cup of tea with a biscuit on the side. Nina looked at the woman, wide-eyed, mouth agape. "Thank you," she stammered to the nurse. She watched the nurse closely. The nurse didn't look sick, or like she had come into contact with some horrible evil monster. No, she looked just fine, which made Nina think, then how evil can I really be? It was the first time that Nina had ever doubted what everyone else was gaslighting her into believing, that she was nothing. Nina would never forget that act of kindness that woman showed her that day at the clinic. On the way home from this huge ordeal, Nina was forced to have to listen to her parents bickering in the car over how other people might see this abortion if they found out. The culture, the community. The way these things work within tight knit communities is that they use honor as a means to control. They all talk like children playing a game of telephone, but with deadly results. Can you imagine what it would be like to be so incredibly concerned about what your neighbor thinks about your kid's relationship to the point where you might brutally murder them over it? But it all comes down to honor and dowries. You've heard of Keeping Up with the Joneses? It's like a brutal, deadly version of that, where families one up each other in who can control their daughter the most in hopes of the best husband for her and the most honor for the family. It seemed as though they made the decision to move Nina to India, which most likely meant she would be murdered in what is referred to as an honor killing. the murder of a family member to restore that family's honor when it has been damaged. The message that Nina was receiving was that no one wanted her. So she attempted to self exit, but it was ineffective. Luckily, she survived, though she wouldn't feel lucky because her life was about to get a whole lot worse again. The very person who would save her from her own murder in India would be one of the predators who had stayed behind to keep assaulting her, one of the violent ones. Of course, he would have to be paid in order to keep this silence, this shame from getting out over their community. And so at just 16 years old, Nina would marry his son. You see, the son had a girlfriend from a white British family, and that was also a huge taboo. So this marriage would fix all those little cracks in the thin, brittle shells that were both of the family's so-called honor. Her future husband didn't want anything to do with Nina, and Nina was left to be abused by her father-in-law constantly. This new home that she was living in was nothing like her family home. She was able to reflect that her family was relatively wealthy, even though she herself didn't get to live in that wealth. Her first experience in her new in law's home, she was stripped naked and ridiculed by her mother in law in a power play, no doubt, to dehumanize Nina and show off for her friends. She will be a great servant for us, her mother in law told everyone proudly. It's not untrue. It is what she had been doing her whole life, after all. Her mother in law would come to treat her even more cruelly, going so far as to forcing her to eat from the floor, if she got to eat at all. She blamed Nina because her own husband was essaying her, and she couldn't blame him, patriarchal head of the family. Thanks to the family's greed, they also pushed Nina to go out and get a job. Working would become her freedom to an extent. Like school, she could find a different Nina to become, a braver Nina. She became a real go-getter at work, adopting the philosophy that if you want it, ask for it. One day at work, her coworker, Maya, saw her socks. "Oh my God, Nina, what's up with your ankles? Is that blood? What's going on with you?" she asked Nina. This coworker was from a similar Indian culture that participated in similar behaviors, and she was convincing Nina that it's okay now. It has calmed down a lot. Really, you should try to go home. Nina slowly began to open up to her colleagues and was heavily swayed by the positivity that she was receiving from her work friend. I mean, it had been 4 years after all. "I'm dating a Nigerian guy. His name's Ade, and my family doesn't really care. Seriously, it's not a big deal these days," her friend told her. She had met her boyfriend. He worked with them too. But to be honest, she kind of got a bad feeling about him. After listening to her friend talk for a while, Nina started to think maybe it would be okay. She should at least try to go home and see her family, right? Because surely no family would want their child to go through this, right? And just like that, she had romanticized traveling home until the fantasy of going home to see her family was born. Nina all but forgot about everything that led up to the point of the marriage because it sounded like such a beautiful thing to go home to your family. I mean, right? I'm sure they missed her. The standard was to be away from your family for at least 4 or 5 years before they will even want to hear from you. Because after all, you're supposed to be working on making a baby, of course. Before Nina knew it, she was on a bus back to her hometown. After being SA'd by her father in law for the last time and giving him the body language to know she was done and she was leaving, she knew she couldn't stay. Not really. It was at this point that she understood that if she stayed, she risked being murdered or self exiting. She had left her job because she hadn't even realized by this point that she was the one who got that job. Nina's way of life was crediting everybody else for her successes. She felt like since she was leaving, she didn't deserve to keep that job. The fact that her father had initiated a gang essay against her, her mother's cruelty, her brother's beatings, I mean, they only came floating back into her mind as she was halfway through her trip home. And that familiar panic began setting in. And in the same way that dictators encourage citizens to alert on each other's bad deeds, someone from Nina's home community spotted her on that bus and immediately notified her family, no doubt feigning concern because they knew exactly what was going to happen when they did this. And so the cycle continued. Whispers started flying back and forth. Why hasn't she had a baby yet? Uh, I don't know. Better yet, why is she on her way home? Oh my God, do you think she has done something wrong? But the loudest whisper of all was, how did he lose control over his daughter? The pressure was building and building, and Nina could feel it. She arrived to her old home, placed her hand on the doorknob, and pulled the door open and saw her dad inside, which she thought was pretty weird since he was supposed to be at work. It was then that they dragged her back to that room, that same guest room, the room that she was gang essayed years ago, the room in which the activities that happened caused her to become pregnant, which set off events that couldn't be stopped. Back in that room, a decision had been made for her, a decision to murder her to save the so called honor of the family. Now, maybe to you and I, this is hard to make sense out of because honor is just a construct. I mean, right? This is a very real part of life within the Punjabi culture. Nina's brother began hitting her in the face over and over until her jaw was broken. And then her dad chimed in and started beating her and kicking her. And her mother and sister in law glared angrily at her as Nina was beat mercilessly. Imagine what all of that anger pent up over having to constantly think about the family name when they can let all of that out on someone. How terrifying and violent and brutal that must have been. During all of this, the realization came upon Nina that she was going to die here. We don't want you here anymore, Nina, they said. Yes, you should have died at birth. We knew something like this would happen. We should have killed you from the beginning. And no one will ever want you again. You're all used up. All of these words, they carried the weight of an elephant or 10. Nina could feel herself drifting away, drifting in and out of consciousness. She began to disassociate. She watched herself from outside of her body, watching her father place his foot over her throat. What? What was that they said? Not here. Taking her. India. And then the room went dark for some unknown amount of unaccounted for days. And when she came to, she noticed that she was lying in her own blood and waste. And what was that sound? That sound that woke her up. Nina, Nina, psst. There it was again. She looked around and she saw her mother's friend peeking in the door at her. Nina, Nina, oh my God. Nina, they're taking you to India soon. I think they said Sunday. Nina, are you listening? You have to get to a guard at the airport. And just like that, the voice slipped away. It had been one of her mom's friends, one of the only people who had ever showed her anything close to kindness. It was at this point that Nina began to have a little conversation with herself. Should I just let it end, give up, and just go on with them willingly? Then they win, and there's no getting out of it at that point. But they said no one will ever want me. They're probably right. The hurtful words of her family were still ringing fresh in her ears. Well, we'll never know if we don't get up. Get up, get up, get up. And with that, Nina got up. First, she made it across the room, then slowly, slowly into the kitchen, crawling through to the door. No, 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 no. This is just too much. It's just too impossible, she said to herself, finding the door handle was just too far out of reach. The outside is on the other side of this door. We have to do it, the other part of her said to herself. Before she knew it, she was in the garden, and eventually, after seeing her dog, who thank God didn't bark, which gave her reassurance, she was able to keep going. Up and over the fence and into the park in an area to hide in the bushes. Tons of time went by, and she knew someone would be searching for her. She stayed put. She would have to lay low, at least overnight. In the early morning, she was able to make it to a taxi, and so she would find herself at the hospital after first attempting to go to her work friend's home, the friend who encouraged her to go back home. Maya. She's really the only person that Nina knew on the outside of her home life. There was no one else. And unfortunately, Maya was not home. Nobody answered the door. So the taxi driver drove Nina to the police station, where he carried her in, since she could not hold her own weight. The officers began writing a report, taking photos, and asking Nina what had happened. Well, you see, that they tried to perform an honor killing. That was kind of the end of that. As soon as the words honor killing came out of Nina's mouth, she was basically dismissed. The looks on their faces said, we can't do anything about this. Because, I mean, who's to say what happened? It's too complex. We don't know the nuances of their religion and their culture. Which is really just an easy excuse to not do anything at all. All of a sudden, all of the words of her family throughout the years came flooding back to her memory right before her eyes, and she was living the proof of it. The police won't help you. They will never help someone of our kind, our color, or our background. They will only help white people. It was then that they took her to the hospital. Nina would be at the hospital for some time. Trauma is a weird thing. It can take your memory and wash it. Not like a normal wash, though. You know, I am very guilty of this. When you have way too much clothing in the washing machine and you're almost out of washing detergent, the clothes, they get like a little clean. Maybe you could wear the socks out of that load or something, but the rest of the clothes usually have to be washed again because they were so poorly washed. That's kind of what trauma does to the memory of an event or a set of events. It puts huge holes in it, garbles it up, throws your sense of time. Hell, it even throws off your whole timeline. So it's hard to know exactly how long the hospital stay was. Over 2 months, under a year, somewhere in there. Nina did learn a few things while she was in the hospital. She learned how people behaved in the wild while lying in her hospital bed, listening and watching everything around her. She noticed what type of items or presents that people would bring with them into the hospital when visiting their loved ones. She was like a fly on the wall because it's not like anyone noticed her or acknowledged her. No one ever came to visit her in the hospital. It was obvious that something horrendous had happened to her just by the looks of her, but people just walked by, acted as though she wasn't there. That was easier, more digestible to people. One day, she saw a bright orange sticker on her chart that said something about the honor killing attempt. It now seemed obvious to Nina that the entire hospital took note of that little orange sticker because no one seemed to even want to look at her. She may as well have been invisible. When Nina had enough, she checked with the hospital about leaving. She was taken over to a shelter for women, but there were many who were going through their own trauma and or suffering from substance use disorder, which terrified Nina. She had grown up hearing about the women who went to, find themselves with drugs and alcohol. So being there at that women's shelter terrified her. She told the people who ran the shelter that she thought she would be better off if she stayed with a friend from work, to which they gave her a little bit of money and sent her on her way. Nina became excited. She couldn't wait to see her friend from work. Just a little while later, she was knocking on the door. Her friend's boyfriend, Ade, answered it. Hey, hey, hey! Oh my God, hey, what happened to you? You never came back to work. We were so worried about you. Oh, is Maya here? No, actually, we broke up, but what happened to you? Uh, I I managed to get away from everything and then I narrowly escaped. I was looking for somewhere to stay because Maya had invited me early. Oh, of course, you can stay here as long as you pay rent after you start working somewhere. There are a few rooms for rent in this apartment. Really? You'll help me? Of course. It was then that Ade gained a hero-like status in Nina's eyes. He was helping her. All the while she realized that her family was probably searching for her by now. They would not stop looking until they found her. And when they found her, they would finish her. They would finish the job, preferably by a beheading, because that is the way to acquire the most amount of honor for the family. In their culture and in their sick, deprived minds, murder was the only answer, the only way to quiet the shame. Nina quickly and easily obtained another job at a local government office. A couple weeks later, Ade invited Nina to a birthday party the landlord was throwing. Nina had never been invited to a birthday party, but thanks to her lengthy stay at the hospital, she at least had an idea of something to bring. Flowers. Once they arrived to the party, the guest of honor seemed tickled over the flowers, so Nina felt pretty good about herself. Ade seemed to make it his job to make sure that Nina's red plastic cup never went dry. What a guy. She had never really had much soda in her life. No, she certainly wasn't a soda connoisseur like myself. But she had drank enough to feel as though there was something odd about the taste of the drink. It tastes weird, Nina said, as Ade handed her yet another drink. Have you ever had soda? This is sweeter than Coke. It's Pepsi. Oh, okay. A few hours later, Nina told Ade that she wasn't feeling well. He told her he would take her home, which he did. The next thing Nina remembers, however, was waking up naked in her bed, with no memory of coming back to their apartment. 2 missed periods later, she realized she was pregnant from the SA Ade had planned out by spiking her drink that night of the birthday party. I want you to get an abortion. This is the first time in my life anything has felt right. I must keep the baby. Nina was super guilty of romanticizing everything, her tray, the grand return to her family, this. But don't we all do that? Especially to get us through some of the most horrible times of our lives. Maybe it was selfishness. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the thought of having to go back to that cold clinic on the countryside where she was forced to have the first abortion. She never really thought past the idea that there might be more than one of these clinics because she had so little life experience still. And so her daughter was born. And she celebrated that baby girl so much. She even threw a little party, inviting everyone she could, which were basically just the people she rented from. But there was even a beautiful cake. Nina was determined to celebrate her daughter in a way that daughters were not typically celebrated by her culture, with love and respect and opportunities and education. She wanted to give her daughter everything she wished her mom had given her. She wanted to break the cycle of abuse onto baby girls, which she was very well doing. But another cycle of abuse would continue, one that she was barely aware of, but that she somehow thought she could deal with. And she would end up staying with this partner for the next 23 years, enduring violent, worsening abuse. Just as she was getting used to motherhood, Nina's father had received information about her having a baby girl. This sent terror through her. He managed to locate the landlady's shop that Nina was renting from. Whether it was dumb luck or not, he went inside the shop wearing this outlandish blonde wig and offered the landlady money in exchange for knowing the location of the girl in the picture, which was Nina. I don't know who she is. I've never seen her before, and I don't want that money. He seemed to go away after that, but Nina was rightfully worried. Worried that her dad might even go so far as to throw something through the letter slot of the door. The landlady told her, "You must stay upstairs. You'll be safer up there." Wouldn't you know that that room upstairs was a little bit more money? But hey, Nina had to take it. She had to keep them safe. She became pregnant again, this time with a boy, so her partner was extremely happy and proud, though it was short-lived. Ade began going out more and more and living a very luxurious lifestyle in which he was not paying a dime for. It was Nina who was paying for it, because around this time she had gotten her second job in this area that they lived in. She began selling mobile phones, and she was damn good at it too. They even gave her her very own shop. Her inner entrepreneur was making its debut. They moved into a bigger house too. Soon after her son was born, she became pregnant again. Ade again demanded that she get an abortion, but Nina didn't want to, so she didn't. But Ade's violence increased exponentially. This one time, he had waited until she was sleeping and set her pillow on fire. Horrifying nightmares would plague Nina about burning brides due to the smell of her hair burning after Ade did this. It reminded her of the smell she had once witnessed on her walk home from school, knowing it was a burning bride. Ade's control became unavoidable. Nearing the end of the third trimester, Ade pushed Nina down onto her stomach, and then he left her there. Nina knew she had to make it to the hospital. She felt as though the baby was coming. She was able to make it to the hospital, but the baby did not survive. Nina entered into a deep depression, so dark that she found it hard to care for her other children. She managed to talk her husband into giving her one more child, saying that she was one of three and she wanted to have three, even though she endured a constant berating, violence, and financial abuse. He did give her a third child, but he was spending her money, living a luxurious, completely 100% free lifestyle because all of Nina's paychecks were going right into Ade's account. And the money that she was given to buy food for the children, it wasn't enough. So Nina had to eat less. She never saw any of that money. Feeling that his comfortable lifestyle was threatened by Nina's inability to work when she was depressed made him angry. But Nina was able to give birth to the third boy. Yes, it was a boy. And she felt as though she could go on, which she did. Nina's daughter had gone away to college, and eventually she was able to send her first son to a type of boarding school to try to get him away from the abuse of the household. She reasoned with herself that she could send the other son away soon enough because the thought of leaving Ade wasn't even present. She had grown up all of her life being told that she was no one, and she kind of believed it. When her son went away to boarding school, it seemed to take a huge toll on her youngest son because he now had no one to turn to when Nina was being abused. At one point, Ade had sent his daughter a picture message saying, "I'm sorry." The picture was of her youngest brother slumped over the table in a very weird position, and Nina sleeping, which just felt very wrong. Her daughter obeyed the awful feeling she got and called the house over and over and over until somebody picked up. Finally, Nina did pick up, though her throat was really parched and scratchy, so she told her daughter, "Wait a minute, I'm going to go and get some water." Put the phone down, went to get the water, and saw that all of the gas was turned up to the max, just waiting for the strike of electricity to ignite the entire home. This incident came after a hospitalization of her youngest son due to all the stress. He had developed an autoimmune disorder because, as we all know, the body keeps the score. It seemed as though Ade just completely disowned his son because he could not have a son who had a disability. 2015 was the breaking point in the home life situation, and Nina's youngest son told his school about the attempt on their lives. They were moved to a shelter of sorts, but shelter is kind of a nice word for this. It was pretty much unlivable. But unlivable or not, they still weren't even allowed to stay there due to how much money it appeared that Nina made on paper. So they became unhoused. Nina was able to eventually get help from a friend. Things didn't automatically get better from here, but Nina knew she was on the right path. That same year, Nina also learned that she'd had a half sister in which her father had abducted and taken to India, likely due to what he and others of his culture see as dishonor that this child brought to his family because he made the choice to create this baby out of wedlock when he cheated on his wife. Nina did a character witness against her father for the charges that were filed against him, but he only served a very short amount of time in jail and went home hailed as a hero. It took Nina 5 or 6 years to figure out what to do with this information, as she felt an immense sense of guilt for not holding her father accountable. She had to take time to try to almost deprogram herself from her upbringing. She survived labor and sexual trafficking, a murder in the so called name of honor, and a very violent relationship. Around 2021, Nina decided to commit herself to making content to spread the word about honor killings, forced marriages, and trafficking, and also to look for her half sister Julia, whose location is still unknown. She began the nonprofit organization endhonorkillings.org. Nina is also currently on two advisory boards on Scotland Yard helping to educate law enforcement on the nuances of honor based violence. Thanks to her entrepreneurial skills, she has made a name for herself as, quote, London's life coach, coaching and helping people to recognize their own potential. I have to admit, just reading her story has made me educate myself more on the cultural nuances that allow this misogynistic behavior to continue. We cannot be afraid to talk about these things, and we have to call them out for what they are. Like Nina says, there is no honor in killing. Nina Aouilk's contact information can be found with the source notes. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Great in the Sack when misogyny leads to mayhem. How did you feel about this episode? Feel free to let me know in the comments. And remember, stay vigilant, stay vocal, because silence is complicity.